Marjorie Phillips is our current chair of the commission, so she's going to speak first and give us some updates from the commission, and then I'm going to talk about our most recent match. It seems kind of silly because we're in the middle of recruitment season, but I always share the stats from the match earlier in the year. So that's what we'll do, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, Marjorie?
Thank you very much. Everybody can hear me now. I think it's a real pleasure to be here in person in front of all of you, and I want to give a shout out to the two previous chairs of the commission, Suzanne Turner and Julie Gagum, who had to do this taped in advance and virtual, so it's great to be able to be here live. And we're going to cover some introductions of current and new COC members. A lot of activities, a lot of action going on over the last year, our accomplishments, things under development, before turning things over to Janet for our residency growth match and well-being information. And we want to leave plenty of time for your questions and comments and input. So I want to recognize the current members of the Commission on Credentialing, and I'm going to ask that they all stand. Many of them are in the front of the room here, so stand so they can be recognized. And I want to in particular recognize those members in red that are finishing their terms on the commission. Julie Dagum, past chair, Noelle Trinder, our public member, Marnie Wixer from AMCP, Jeff Huntress, Lonnie Smith, and our resident member, Kaylee Denny. And here's some new COC members for the next year, including some that are continuing on the commission and leadership roles. Carrie Pickworth is going to be our new chair. Carrie, go ahead and stand up. And Pat Fuller will be the vice chair. And any of the new commission members that are here, if you would stand up, I think we have a couple in the front. I know I saw Winter there. And great, thank you. So we have representatives from all the different major pharmacy organizations and partners, residency partners, as well as different areas of practice, and they're really important. So this is my opportunity to brag on behalf of the whole commission, as well as the great Accreditation Services Division, about all of our accomplishments. It's been a really busy time, and I think in the midst of COVID and all of the work that we've been doing in our institutions, these great engaged members of the commission and our wonderful staff has been really working in overdrive to accomplish a lot of things that are helping enhance the quality of residency training and the experience for our graduates. And really want to celebrate the fact that the residency accreditation standard was revised and approved, and as Janet said, is effective on July 1 with the new residency class. And Julie, please stand up and be recognized as the person that spirited all of us through this process. Julie Dagger. So you'll get a chance to hear from her tomorrow with a high-level overview and Q&A on the new standards. But the subcommittee of commission members and staffers met pretty much weekly for the last couple of years. And then we had large group meetings. We had a number of extra commission meetings to get these standards put together. So I think that it's really remarkable that the PGY1, the PGY2 standard, and all the guidance is in one document. So there was a lot of consolidation, a lot of things that were redundant, a lot of things that were in more than one place, a lot of things that were confusing. I think all of us learned a lot in the process when we found out things that were being interpreted differently. So I hope this is going to do a lot to streamline the process and make it easier to have excellent residency programs and meet the intent of the standard and understand it. A really important effort, the Diversity Resource Guide was created, and Akila is here, Akila Strauder. Please stand and be recognized as well. Akila and also Leah Smith, who was a former member of staff, who originally brought the concept and helped spearhead the beginning of it. Leah, are you here in the audience as well? And Pat was also part of that group. So thank you very much. I'm sorry. How many of you have already taken that 13-page resource guide and read it and started putting some of those resources to use in your programs? So if you haven't looked at it and from front to cover, please do. It's a great resource for background literature, ideas, suggestions, and things. This is a living and evolving document that will help us all share and learn from each other to help improve inclusivity in recruitment and diversity in practice and ultimately better training and better care for our patients. So the guidance has been updated for the new standard, and the guidance is constantly being revised. In fact, in the March Commission meeting, we're going to go back and do some final tweaks to guidance before the implementation in July, just to make it as clear as possible for how the standards are to be interpreted. So I think the new guidance is much clearer, more streamlined, and it'll be very effective and easier to use. Something else that I'm really excited about is some new pharmacy residency program types under the PGY2 and some really new concepts. So competencies, areas, goals, and objectives, or KGOs, and associated appendix was developed for a novel new program type, the PGY2 Thrombosis and Hemostasis Management Pharmacy Residency. This is a demonstration residency under our revised novel process for novel residency programs. So that KGOs for this program has been developed, approved, and the very first resident has started in the candidate status program at Brigham and Women's Hospital for this July. So under the demonstration process, we had a work group that was led by Carrie Pickworth that involved stakeholders as well as individuals from the submitting hospital and a lot of different support from different areas to put together a demonstration program and KGOs that then can be used by other institutions that want to try the same program type. And we'll be able to shepherd it and watch it over the next 4 years and develop as additional programs hopefully come online in this important new area. And we already have a few have already been submitted? Great. So I think this is the same idea of building new pearls. Is you get that the initial kernel, that initial core, and then just start building levels of sparkle and excellence around it. So I'm really, really excited about that process. So if you have a new novel program type, if you remember back in the old Wild Wild West days, there was a general structure, and anybody could come up with their own PGY2 and out of the gate just put something together. This really allows a real deliberative process to say, is it something truly novel and different that is sustainable, and to put a lot of work in the process to start up. So this new program is starting up with everything built in pharmacokinetic for it, and all the objectives all set, and hopefully everything to make this program type successful, not only for the first programs and first resident, but the ones that have already applied and that will be coming behind it. Another really important area of need as we looked at specialization within pharmacy is the situation of pediatrics. And those of us that practice in children's hospitals for years have been saying pediatrics is a different kind of specialty, right? It's a very broad specialty, and you're not only pediatric practitioners, but you're pediatric ID practitioners, pediatric critical care practitioners, pediatric oncology practitioners, and you aren't the same as adult ID, adult oncology, adult critical care. It's a unique, layered process because you have to be a really good pediatric pharmacist, right? And then have that specialization within it. So there was a great work group that was looking at that process of specialization in pharmacy in general, but then realized our highest priority for it was within pediatrics to say this is an area where there is specialization going on right now and a need for more specialized training in a very different way from the way cardiology has peeled off from pharmacotherapy or medicine or some of the other adult specialties have branched out. So what was developed here, also under the demonstration umbrella, is KAGOs and associated appendices for PGY2 pediatric pharmacy residency specializations in critical care and oncology. And what's different about this is the competencies, areas, and goals and objectives are the PGY2 pediatric ones, because those all need to be taught and evaluated and achieved for those residents to be successful. But the appendices is then focused not only on the patient types, but also specific conditions that need to be met in those institutions as far as depth of patient care, depth of expertise of the preceptors, and the specialization of the institution, so the residents will have a training site to truly be trained in that area of specialization within pediatrics. So there's been a great group of thought leaders in pediatrics that have been working on this for over a year. Many of them are in the audience too, so I'd like to ask them to stand up and be recognized as well. Jen Hamner from the commission is leading that group. I don't know if Jen is in the room, but several others of you are, if you want to go ahead and stand. Also under development, a lot of great work. The Wellbeing Resource Guide. So similar to the Diversity Resource Guide, there's a lot of work that's been put into a Wellbeing Resource Guide. This will continue to be developed and updated. It is finished. It's going to be available on the website by the end of the year, so sometime later this month. So look for that resource as well. And there is a virtual training work group that has been meeting for over a year, looking at issues related to virtual training. We realize that COVID and all the restrictions have placed many more of us as practitioners in a situation where we have to deliver care virtually, but also precept virtually, and that creates challenges for our interactions with patients, with other caregivers, and between preceptors and trainees. So we want to make sure that this is done with really high quality. That group has looked at conditions that have to be met in order for virtual training to be conducted in a way that meets the conduct of the residency standard. And there is a self-assessment document and some additional materials. Some of this is being piloted specifically within the managed care PGY1 residency programs, because that's a special program type where much of your care is being delivered in a virtual environment pre-COVID. But we're finding that many different program types, everything from ambulatory care to critical care, some of your care is being delivered virtually now. So those are challenges and things to look for. So look for additional resources as far as self-assessments and FAQs on virtual training and how to do that in a way that is is in the best interest of the trainee, the patient care, and the quality of the residency program. So even though the new standards are approved, published, and being built in pharmacademic for a July start, there are still work to be done. And so there are work groups now that are finalizing the critical factors under the new standards, because the number of standards have decreased, the amount of duplication has decreased, so you're going to see new critical factors, and that information will be published once it's available. And there's also a crosswalk that will be published from the current standard to the revised standard.
And that's almost done.
That's almost done, so Andrea, early next year, and that'll be out. Andrea's, but
She finished
so
it on the
it's okay, so maybe even before the end of the year, so sometime soon. That's all finished, and it'll be published on the website as well. So take a look for that. Those of you that were here for the pharmacademic session right before this heard that the updated APR form, something we've asked about for years, has finally been built in pharmacademic, and that should be released this summer. So those of you that don't have a survey between now and then, I think the best thing to do is wait until that's available. Having it in pharmacademic will have it much more easy to maintain, and something we've all looked forward to for quite a long time. Example documents also being finalized, and also something that will be posted as well, and then continue to be updated, but look for a lot of examples of documents that meet the intent of the new standard and are some best practice thinking. So a lot of work products that are there. A best practice guide is also in development that will be sharing some of those best practices. So the commission work is never done. And now that the new standards are approved and about to be released, work has already started on the KGOS revision. So competency areas, goals, and objectives are being revised for all the program types. So there's a group that has been working starting this summer on core KGOS for all PGY1 programs. And then we're also going to be looking at sort of a best of and consolidating to standardize the KGOS. We're going to be revising all of the KGOS, starting with the PGY1s, and then quickly going into all the PGY2 areas. What's happened with so many different PGY2 programs is that with each new one, there have been some new tweaks to the appendices and maybe some changes in wording. So one of the things that we're going to do is, again, take the best of and go through as each KGO type is being revised, be looking for input from practitioners, getting a group together of program directors in that area of specialty, but also looking at trying to standardize some of the terminology and the wording of KGOs that are common across all program types or have very similar wording. So it'll be an opportunity, if there's something you really want to see in the KGOs or see changed, there's an opportunity then for input from you at that stage. And of course, pharmacodynamics builds are being put together to support the revised standard, and then these new KGOs as they're rolling out. So everything will be in place. And the goal with the pediatric specialization is that the final appendices and final details of those programs will be approved at the March COC meeting, so McCready Group can build that, and that will be available to be launched by summer with the new residency class as well. A lot of work going on. I also want to recognize making people stand, because you're sitting for so many hours. I want to recognize our lead surveyors and our ASO staff, really dedicated team that is so committed to residency program and residency training and done so much for us. So please, if all of you would stand up and also accept a round of applause from us as program directors. So thank you so much for all that you do. So education. You already heard about we had sessions at the National Preceptors Conference, sessions here, this one here, the meet the surveyors, the residency program design and conduct that was held on Saturday, but also the session tomorrow on the standards. So there will be some more virtual sessions rolling out in the spring, so look for additional materials to come. And I'm going to turn things over to Janet now to talk about residency growth and capacity.
She does such a nice job, doesn't she? I have to say that not only do I have the best staff in the world, but I have the luxury of having a really phenomenal group of people that serve as your Commission on Credentialing members. So I would like to echo Marjorie's recognition and thank them for all their hard work, because rolling out a new standard is no joke. There is a ton of work. And those competency areas, goals, and objectives, that entire work will be led by Eric Grace, who I believe is standing up and right now as we speak. So Eric is our standards and education director, and so a lot of what we will roll out over the next 18 months or so with regard to new KGOs will be the work that is spearheaded by Eric. So thank you, Eric. And he just finished with all the standard work. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about residency growth and capacity. So I always like to just share with you what our growth curve looks like, because it's, since the beginning of time, or, when I was early in my first job, residencies programs have been growing, and it's pretty remarkable. I finally had to cut off some of the early years off the slide because it was too long, too busy. But we're now up to, it's actually, this was as of October, and now I think we're up to 2,800 and maybe about 50 programs, because of course this is the beginning of recruitment season, so Katrin is processing lots of new applications. So that is really wonderful. Even in the face of the pandemic, we continued to see growth, even though it didn't mirror the growth that we had prior to the pandemic. It really did continue, which was remarkable. We didn't really know what to expect. So this is a look at, as of that, I think this was as of October too, and I didn't change that date, but the residency program, PGY1, PGY2, combined PGY1 and 2, and then we have those 5 international pharmacy practice residencies that have a different standard all of their own, but I like to reflect them on this slide as it is. But you can see the most significant thing to take away from this slide is that PGY2 is nearly as high a volume of programs as PGY1. And this is the result of growth that has been happening in PGY2s for the last 5 to 7 years. The growth in PGY2 programs has outpaced the growth in PGY1 programs, even in the absence of CMS funding to support the PGY2s. So this is remarkable, and what we take from that is that the market is demanding this level of training. So the specialization that we have in the PGY2 residency training is being demanded by our employers, which supports the growth of these programs without external funding. So I think that is pretty remarkable. And if you look at just what is currently our PGY1 distribution, the largest portion continues to be the traditional PGY1s in hospitals and health systems. And PGY1 community continues to grow and is currently probably more than 181. But when I stopped to create the slide, this is what it was. But Akila tells me my numbers are wrong, that, that it's actually more than that. So that's great news, right? And then PGY1 managed care has been very steady for some years, around 48. So I always like to kind of look at what's been happening within the PGY2 groupings and who's really growing the most. ID, clearly, over the last couple of years is an important aspect of the care we provide. So that has continued to grow. Pediatrics, as we were just discussing. And then pain and palliative care, although it looks like a smallish number there on the far right, has really almost doubled in the number of programs, and that is due largely to new programs within the VA system. They have a focus within their system on pain management and palliative care, and that is reflected in the growth of those programs. And we still see emergency medicine growing, internal medicine even. AmCare sort of took over as the largest number of programs several years ago, which of course makes perfect sense when you look at what happens within healthcare. There's a big push towards AmCare, and so that is reflected in the growth of these programs. So we're going to talk a little bit about the two-phase match. And remember that we've been doing a two-phase match since 2016. And at that time, if you guys can remember back that far, you all who are as old as me do, when we were at the end of phase 1 and we didn't have a phase 2, we had 350 programs or so that went into the scramble. And I had open positions and, a couple of thousand unmatched residents, and it was a nightmare, a holy mess. And so we talked to our colleagues in medicine and really tried to understand what would be the value of adding a second phase to our match. And we learned that we look exactly like they did when they decided to do a second phased match. It was where you had so much volume at the end of the match that it became untenable and very stressful. So we went ahead and added a phase 2 of the match, and now later in a later slide I'll show you what that has really done for us. But it puts more structure into the process and keeps things a little bit more organized. And I think it was a good decision when we decided to do that back in 2016. Seems like so long ago now. But for PGY1 this year, in the 22 match, we had a 5% increase in positions offered, and 3% was what we saw in 21. And we had a 12% decrease in applicants, and I'm going to talk more about that later. And it was flat in 2021. In PGY2, which does include the early commits, we had 5% increase in positions offered, and that was 1% in 21, and a 9% decrease in applicants, and it was a 3% increase in 21. And just so you get a flavor for how many early commits, there were 595 early commits in 22 compared to 594 in 21, and the previous year was about 100 less. So, you know, we even talked one time about getting rid of the early commit process, and I think you guys would have found me and strung me up because it does provide an opportunity for programs and current residents who decide that their interests are well aligned for them to be brought into a PGY2 program early. It allows them to avoid the match, and it reduces some of that burden on the program and the applicants. So I think this reflects that this is well thought of by the programs, and certainly it makes a lot of sense for the applicants. So clearly we're not getting rid of that anytime soon. So this is a very busy slide, but really all it shows you is the comparison, and these are the slides from the town hall at the Preceptors conference are already out on the website, and we will put these slides out there too, so don't try to like read this slide. You can look at it later when you can actually read it. But what this really shows is a comparison between the number of applicants, the number that are matched, compared to the number of positions. And this is the slide for just PGY1, and it shows sort of the history of that. And then for PGY2, same thing. It shows, in addition to that, the early commits, but it shows the total number of positions, the number of applicants, and the number matched. And the combined fill rate, and this is comparing PGY1 to PGY2, is 95.8%. So it's not as high as it has been in some previous years. We've been as high as 98%. And this is really the story of the two-phase match here. So the top section is what was reflected in the 2021 match, and the bottom is 22. And for PGY1, at the end of phase 2 of the match, in 21 there were 19 unfilled positions for PGY1 and 34 for PGY2. And so there were about 53 unfilled positions compared to 2,448 unmatched applicants. Now this year, we can't figure out exactly what happened because the numbers are very different from what we have seen all the way since 2016. So we had 74 unfilled positions for PGY1 and then 146 for PGY2. So that's 220 going into the scramble, which is really not what we want to see. So we'll have to wait until next year to see if this is just an anomaly or what. But we ended up then with 1,451 unmatched applicants at the end of the match. So let's talk a little bit about what some of this means. We always try to look at the percentage of graduates that are seeking residency training. And so I get numbers of graduates every year from AACP, and I don't get the numbers for 22 until like midway through 23. So this slide is always a little bit behind, but it does give you the trend. And you can see, if you're looking at the graduates number from the top to the bottom, that the growth in graduates has slowed and plateaued and even decreased a little bit. And the participants in the match is relatively flat between 20 and 21. And so what that means is that our percentage of graduates in the match, or those seeking residency training, are about 43%. That's still a pretty hefty number, even though we know that the total number of applicants has gone down this year. And so this is the data we got out of forecasts, showing us exactly what happened with applicants. So in 21, we had 8,691 applicants, and this year we had 7,371. So that was a 15% drop in applicants. Hard to know what that really means, if it's finally a reflection of the flattening of the graduates from schools of pharmacy, or if there's something else going on. And I've spoken some with my colleagues in academia, and they feel like it's probably a number of things, including interest in fellowships, or the change in the market and people taking advantage of sign-on bonuses to go straight into the workforce. So what we are seeing is probably a combination of things, but we will, of course, continue to monitor this and see if this is a trend or if this is an anomaly resulting from the change in the number of graduates, the pandemic, and a number of other things. And this is your match schedule, and regardless of how many times you look at slides you put together, and even my eagle eye editor over here, Marjorie, we still have an error. At the very bottom, it's not April 14 of 20, it's 23. So of course, Akila found that error for me, but she's my eagle eye too. But anyway, this is your match schedule for this year. So you can see when we will finish phase 2 match in the spring. So one of the things that we discussed at the Preceptors Conference in October was the issue of licensure and this perception that we have that our pass rates for NAPLEX were not good, and there were a lot of issues within residency programs of residents having to take their exams, either the law exam or NAPLEX or both, more than one time, and the programs having to even dismiss residents as a result of not being licensed in time based on their policy. Now the standard says that the resident has to be licensed for 2/3 of the residency. So we would allow a deadline of November 1, as long as you start in July, right? We do have international programs that start on a different schedule, but generally speaking, November 1 for programs that are in the United States. So we decided to really just take a look and see what really was going on. And this, I just got this hot off the press from my friend at McCready Group, who does the resulting of the RPD survey for 22, which was just concluded, so that I could look at what the issues around licensure were this year compared to last year. So these are all the reasons, but I wanted to just highlight the issue around unable to become licensed within the policy time period. So in 21, it was 28%, and in 22, it was 31%. And so it's not dramatically different, even though it kind of felt different this year for some reason. But, you know, it's always better to kind of look at the facts, but we'll continue to look at that. And I even had a call with Maureen Garrity at NABP about what they were seeing overall with pass rates. Thank you, Marjorie. My brain has left me. I've been up since 4, and so at this point, who knows what'll come out of my mouth. But the pass rates for NAPLEX are down overall. So even outside of, obviously, residency training, they're seeing that trend. So not sure what that means, and I'm certainly not going to take a wild guess at what it is, but it's definitely something to watch. And I'm sure you all were aware of the error with NAPLEX this year, which gave me quite a few more gray hairs. We found out about November 8th or so that there was a problem with Pearson VUE, who administers the NAPLEX exam across the country, that some of the answers in the manual, in the calculations portion of the exam, some of the eligible answers were left off of the exam. So when the NAPLEX exams were scored, there were people who were told that they failed the exam, 220 people, and then in truth, they passed the exam when they rescored those exams manually. So of those 220, there were 34 who were in residency programs, who had matched to residency programs. So nightmare for you, right? Farm Academic had to put people back. Anyway, or open them back up so they could be reactivated. So we ended up contacting all of the programs that were affected to let them know that this person, identifying the individual person within their program that had erroneously been told they failed the exam, and hopefully support with them bringing that person back into the program. And I think we were largely successful. And those people who had a policy that was before November 1 would have to extend their program by the gap time. And so it created lots of issues, but my hat's off to the residency programs who went to great lengths to do what they felt was right for those residents and bring them back if they had been dismissed, and work with them so that this didn't adversely affect their career path. It was a horrible error, and I've talked to Al Carter, who's the CEO at NABP, and asked that they let us know how that what they're going to do to make sure this never happens again. So that's really all I know about that problem, but it was nightmarish, and if any of you in here were affected, I'm so sorry. We did our best to try to help people get back to good at the end of it. So I love doing those kind of things, you know, a few weeks before mid-year or Thanksgiving or... Anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about a program that we have that I think is maybe going to be of interest to you. You know, Marjorie told you that we have our well-being resource guide that is finished. It's being formatted right now, and we'll be able to publish it pretty soon. But we also are hosting through ASHP, not ASO, but ASHP, larger ASHP, a well-being ambassador program. And so it is really a national network of trained pharmacy professionals that are leading efforts to address occupational burnout in their communities. And these ambassadors are trained in well-being strategies to support resilience for themselves and others around them in their community and their organization. And really the ultimate goal is the transformation of organizations into cultures of well-being. But the important part is that there will be a cohort in the summer of residency program directors. So we're looking for, and you all can give this some thought, but we'll be reaching out to you to see if you want to be part of the ambassador program when we do a cohort that is all about residency. So I realize that well-being is a culture within an organization. It's not just within a residency program, but it could be something that is part of a residency project that begins in the summer, or an initiative that you do within your pharmacy department that is supported by your RPDs or even residents. So anyway, just think about it, but this is a link to more information about this ambassador program. And I think, if people are looking for ways to incorporate well-being into their programs, this would be a mentored approach to help you do just that. So I think you should give it some consideration and just be on the lookout for an ask from ASO to submit your name as to be part of the cohort that is focused on residency, and that they've slated for the summer. So sometime in the spring, we should get communication about that. And now we're ready to answer questions. And remember that although I know you're going to try to sneak in questions about the standard, we do have the standard key takeaways presentation tomorrow at 11:30 to 1, and Julie and her gang are prepared to answer your questions there. But we would like to try to answer any other questions that you have. And if you feel the need to sneak in a standard question, I suppose we'll try to answer that too.
Hi, I'm Karen Babb from CHI Memorial in Chattanooga, and we recently underwent an audit, and they did not accept our spreadsheet that our preceptors use.
A CMS audit?
Yes, and we've used this spreadsheet to keep up with our preceptor hours for 12 years, and we've been through many audits, and it's worked fine. Have we gotten any clarification from CMS on how they would like us to document our preceptor hours, since everybody does it different and every accreditor accepts it differently? Yes,
we've had a number of conversations. We met in person with CMS.
Right.
We have somebody on our government affairs staff who's working specifically on that, and Steve Ford, our director of residency accreditation, has been working on that as well. And we sat down with them and talked about what we felt were unfair assessments of compliance for CMS pass-through funding. And they did not disagree with some of our findings, and it looked like it was more an issue with the auditors that they contract with to go out and do these audits, and they were going to work on that. We then followed up with a statement, a number of statements that we wanted them to agree with, and we have not heard back. But of course, we had the pandemic, and but we are following up with CMS about this. But what I would recommend that you do specifically is if you could just email me and just tell me again in the email what your experience was. I want to connect you with our government affairs person who is sort of tracking what's going on with denials of pass-through payment or problems that people are having with that. And there have been some organizations who have sued CMS over this because their residency programs are so large that their pass-through payment is really significant. And then if it's denied, it's quite detrimental to the organization and to the program. So please email me, jsilvester@ashp.org, and I will connect you with the right person that can follow up on your issues related to that. And that's true for anybody who has a CMS issue from an audit. Thank you for bringing that up.
Hi there, Ian Miller. RPD of PGY2 Pediatrics Program, Cook Children's Fort Worth. I just want to applaud you all for the consideration of
Can you hear him?
subspecialties
Yeah.
within.
Can you speak up a little bit or get a little bit closer to the mic?
This is short and I'm tall.
Yeah.
So I just applaud the consideration of the subspecialties within pediatrics. I would just like to know how I can get involved in that for our program.
Did you hear it?
So yes, so the question was how you could get involved with the and with a lot of discussion, it's the wording is specialization within pediatrics rather than subspecialization.
Yes.
So the two KGOs so far that have been and the demonstration that have been developed, or the supplements in the framework is for pediatric oncology and pediatric critical care. Once the final documents are approved by the commission in March, there will be some information forthcoming and information on a process if your residency program is a currently accredited and good standing program that meets the qualifications. You could actually apply to start that process for residents that start in July. So once the commission agreed in concept, but wants to see the nitty gritty and make sure it's set up in a way that can be operationalized. So that's something is coming, and there will be some more details. So we're not necessarily going to stop with critical care and oncology, but those were the two areas of biggest need and the biggest current niches. So there are obviously some other potential areas, whether that's pediatric ID or pediatric ambulatory care. So the demonstration process will be used as a proof of concept to work out the kinks and then go from there and see if there's other areas. So look for more information, both through PAG, who is involved in a lot of providing feedback on the process, and through ASHP once it's approved by the commission and the board.
Okay. So at this point, there's nothing that current pediatric programs can do to be involved in that process, or just wait for more information?
I think just wait for more information. There are draft documents. So, but there has been a cross section of pediatric practitioners that have been guest surveyors and former commission members that have been part of that process, and leadership of the pediatric advocacy group has also weighed in on the document. So there's been a lot of input into the process. And I would say just wait until the April timeframe when all the information will come out.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm a PGY1 preceptor. I'm involved in the Wellbeing Ambassador program right now for the first cohort, and I know a couple of the people on that have asked if there would be a Wellbeing Ambassador program for residents. And since you mentioned that there's going to be one for RPDs, I was just curious if they thought about making one for residents since the new standards and everything too.
Yeah, and I can bring that back to the group, Anna Dopp and her group that are coordinating that, and suggest that, and I don't think they fleshed it fully out about what they're going to do with that, about whether they would consider allowing residents to be part of that. So I'll take that back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
John Armstead, Lee Health, and first I'd like to thank Janet for your outstanding service in advancing residency training across the country over these years. So first of all, I want to make sure we said that. So round of applause for Janet.
Thanks, John.
In regards to the audits being performed by CMS, we are finding as well that they are not necessarily motivated towards instructional advantage of the part of the residency program directors. we're finding that they are trying to, in essence, find ways in which they are going to discount any advantage of actively and appropriately conducting your records in regards to the CMS. I was wondering if there's any way that ASHP can find out if the CMS auditors for PGY1 pharmacy residency training programs are in essence encouraged to not allow reimbursement. If they are, I think that requires further investigation, because I sense that their individual auditors may in fact be paid to not allow or to deny reimbursement. So if some investigation into that area can be conducted, I think
That
it would
was
benefit
actually
us.
part of the discussion, John, that Steve had with CMS, and they deny that. You know, we are trying to have further discussions with them, but we did ask that question. And Jill Ann Schulte is the person on the government affairs staff that was part of that meeting as well.
No,
and-
and I appreciate.
But I mean, we seriously said it looks like that they are being incentivized to disallow, and they denied it.
No, and I appreciate the request on behalf of ASHP, and I understand the statement of denial on the part of CMS, but I would also push for finding out exactly what the method of reimbursement is for said auditors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John.
Hello, Janet.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. So I'm Frank Polachek. I am currently nobody and professionally homeless.
And
So
I've missed you, Frank.
Well, and I moved up because it seems as if my voice has not been heard, but I'm going to try, and I'm a little filled because I've been absent. But I want to keep it simple because I've often just complained and complained, and I'm going to try and just ask for a couple of things,
Okay.
as hard as I can, to just a couple. One is, I really think that while time and effort is being put into the different things that can count as PTO, it is much more important for the organization to state that there is a minimum number of PTO days that a pharmacy resident should have. The survey data talked about the average is 37, and I don't remember the numbers, but there were people that were getting less than 10, and that should be completely unacceptable. And I have heard there was a program survey just within the past couple of weeks that got cited for having less than 10. That's the kind of thing we should do if we want to look to the residents as if we promote wellness. That's one.
Thank you.
Two, I'm tired of PGY2 programs being more important than PGY1s. If they're going to demand that the residents have to have time during their PGY1 year to start early or to go through health or other screening evaluations, well, since they're not worrying about licensure so much, take it out of the PTO time of the PGY2 year. It shouldn't come from the PGY1 programs. They should start July 1st. If you can't mandate July 1st, I don't know why that's a problem, because it would seem to me that any organization in this country starts people on dates other than July 1st. But if we're going to say, well, that's their rules and we have to live by it, well, then have that come out of there. I don't know if that would be, I'm not expecting applause for that, but it's just wrong that they get treated as if their programs are more important than the residents completing the PGY1, and that they have to save time for the end of the year in case that's a requirement to the PGY2 that they're going to. Either that or allow us to continue to hide and pretend that we're doing it like we do with duty hours the right way and get away with it. I'm sorry. Oh!
I know where you live, Frank. Thank you, Frank, for
I
your
know.
feedback.
I make sure you know. And then the third, and this is the hard one, and I'm going to keep it to it. I won't mention the stupid licensure date thing, you know, that people like me were able to go to December, and I don't know why, but anyway, I'm not. I really think that we would do, you all, would do well from your position with all the data that ASHP has, especially with some of the new surveys about where did your residents go and things like that, can we get some sense of outcomes from that data? Because any one program doesn't see enough residents to know. And maybe people like I could go ahead and interview the programs that hired them 2 or 3 months in to see were they ready, and ask the residents, now that you're at that position, are you ready? Do you feel that you're prepared properly? I used to have a big enough program when I ran one. Other programs, how many years does it take to get that? I just think that there's a way to get rid of one of the other dumb surveys and put in something like, ask people, the residents 3 months later, if you can track them down, were you prepared for the job you have? And if they're in PGY2s, you ought to be able to tell the PGY2 directors to give data back about were the PGY1s properly trained for your program. To me, that would seem like a really strong, good organizational initiative to give us some meaningful outcomes and not adherence to a methodology.
Thank you, Frank.
I miss you. Are you going to talk to me later?
No.
No?
Hi, I'm Sharia Bourdet from San Francisco VA Medical Center. I was hoping to take an opportunity of the town hall to get some transparency about the discussion and the decision-making that took place about the standardized application deadline, and hopefully trying to understand a little bit more as to why January 2nd was chosen and what input programs have had the opportunity to provide or would have the opportunity to provide to hopefully decrease the stress for applicants, but also residency directors in what is a very compressed timeline already. So I would appreciate some discussion.
I'm not sure I captured all of that, but you're asking about the application deadline not before January 2nd?
Correct.
Okay. I take full responsibility for sending that out and not recognizing that some people were too far down the line to make any changes this year, and I brought it back. Mea culpa, that was me. But we are going to implement that next year, and the reason is this. We have some programs that have had their application deadline, basically right after mid-year. And so there's very little time for reference writers to do what they need to do, or applicants to get their thoughts together from Residency Showcase and determine who they really want to apply to. And we felt like that was a disservice, those deadlines that were so early, and they were Christmas Day, or they were, it was just, while everybody doesn't celebrate Christmas, there's a lot of holiday recognized in December, and it was creating hardship for applicants and programs. So what we decided to do, and not everybody will be happy with this, but and I can tell you that we don't often make decisions to standardize for you. We like to leave a lot of decisions up to you, but this one we just finally, after having discussion about it for a number of years, decided that we were going to take a stand. So our decision was to avoid January 1 because it's a holiday, and our vendor who supports all of those applications is on holiday along with many of us. And so it's very difficult if there's a problem, a technical problem or something like that, for us to resolve it when application deadlines are on January 1. So that's why we avoided that date. We didn't want to go too late into January because people need to get their interviews scheduled, et cetera. So we picked the closest day into January, avoiding the January 1st holiday in order to standardize. Now, people can have their deadlines later than that, just not before January 2nd. I hope I answered your question.
I think partially, I'm still wondering what dialogue maybe took place with other stakeholders, because it sounds like a lot of this is taking into account mid-year, essentially, as the center. And the other perspectives of registrar's office, which typically are closed for the last 2 and 3 weeks of December, which makes it a hardship to get transcripts out and causes a lot of stress. The fact that January 2nd is the earliest deadline, I've had that as a deadline for 9 years, and it still encourages people to write letters of recommendation on Christmas Day, on Christmas Eve, on New Year's Day. So I'm not sure that it really decompresses a lot of the concerns that you're kind of bringing up. Totally understand that rapid turnaround from recruitment events like ASHP is important, but also wanting to hear from some of the other stakeholders as to what truly would take the stress off, because that compresses the review timeline for hundreds of applications for many programs into a tighter timeline.
Are you hearing that all?
Yeah. I'm not sure we heard all of that. There was some great discussion at the National Preceptors Conference, so I want to bring in some of that discussion and some of the feedback from that. Speaking from myself personally, as well as many of the other program directors, they recognize that the holidays are also, while it's the time that a lot of preceptors are writing references, it's also sometimes the only time that we have that's not competing with patient care and other practice demands for us to start reviewing packets. And I know procrastinators and students being what they are, what 3/4 of the applications get submitted on the program deadline, whatever that deadline is. So some of the feedback that came back from the preceptors meeting that was going to be put in student programming for this meeting, as well as other materials coming out from the section, the student forum, is encouraging, recognizing that there is an advantage to the applicant and a benefit to the programs for the applicants to go ahead and submit their applications early, even if all the references weren't in. And I know one of the things that we've done for years with our students is actually tell them, you're only submitting once. Go ahead and request the transcripts before the end of the semester, and then a second set of transcripts later. So sometimes you're not going to have complete transcripts, but you're at least going to have some, and your applications are going to be complete, because we really have a very tight window for programs to begin reviewing those materials, and it's really balancing the act of all the stakeholders, whether it's the students, the reference writers, or the programs that have to go through and review the applications.
Okay, thank you. I will just say we're taking advantage of an earlier deadline this year to try to give ourselves a break, and hope there's some more discussion before next year. Thanks.
Sorry, so what's the deadline that you're using this year?
So we are using a December 19th deadline. Which has been advertised at all of our open houses, virtual open houses, and we specifically addressed the transcript issue, that is not part of our main screening process, that it can be submitted. One, it just needs to be in good standing, because I think there's a lot of pressure for students to get that last block grade in, which is unfortunately mid-December. And so that leads to a lot of the frustration also from the registrar's office in balancing the application deadline.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it'd be very helpful to everybody to continue to give your feedback on the process to ASHP. But as Janet said, there's a lot of stakeholder concern in all of this. But I think if all the programs have early and earlier deadlines, it's going to be to the detriment of all of us, as well as the students that are applying.
Yeah, our residency advisory committee thought it would actually benefit, and we're taking it as a proof of concept this year, that it would provide a more holistic review and longer time for us to review applications.
Thank you.
Instead of doing such a rapid turnaround in a very crunched amount of time. And I think if we're going to take wellness as an issue, it shouldn't be we do it in the 2 weeks at the end of December, because that's when we don't have patient care duties.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Scott Wagoner, PGY1, PGY2 Residency Program Director at Children's Wisconsin. For the new pediatric-focused critical care and oncology PGY2s, is that going to be a separate designation from the pediatrics PGY2, or is that something that a program will be able to flex the pediatrics to a pediatric critical care or pediatric oncology, depending on what the institution offers?
Yeah. So I'm going to let Janet answer in more detail, and one of the reasons that the information is not going out until April is because we wanted to get all of the logistics worked out and clear in the messaging around this. But what we're trying to do is replace what's happening now in practice, which is a lot of tracks, right? A lot of tracks and emphasis in and programs using language that doesn't mean anything. And the goal was to make sure that the programs that were offering specialization could be recognized on the certificates in a way that ensured for applicants, graduates, as well as the individuals that might be recruiting and hiring these employees, that they had an environment and a training program that gave the type of graduate that had the credentials that needed. So Janet can comment a little bit more on what it's going to look like and how that's going to be finalized.
Well, and we haven't figured all of it out yet, but the idea is that, number one, that it is standardized, because now people are all doing their own thing with the best of intentions, but it's hard to know how to compare these programs when we don't have a standard to hold it up to. So that's one thing. The other is, if you're an employer looking at one of these people, you would want to be able to recognize that they did complete competencies in these specialization areas over and above the standard pediatric competencies. So I think it's really important for us to be able to reflect that for both the person who goes through a program like that and really achieves at a higher level, and for an employer to understand what that really means, because you can go to that program, you can see the competency areas, goals and objectives, any additional information in appendices, and understand exactly what the training was for a person who comes out of one of these programs. So the idea for us is that we would like to understand, when we go into one of these programs, how to survey them properly, and then how to give them credit for the work they're doing and the graduates credit for what they've gone through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with developing the different standards for that. There are some institutions, though, such as ourselves. We're kind of a medium-sized pediatric hospital, but we have a lot of specialties and a lot of patient population in both those areas. Us being in Wisconsin, though, we don't always get a lot of people that want to come to us geographically. You can guess why. So some years we have a lot of candidates that are interested in critical care, and some years a lot of interest in oncology, and some years it's not either of those. It's someone who completed a PGY1 in a mixed adult peds, and they decided during that year that they now want pediatrics, and because of our program, and we only take one PGY2 resident, we can really flex to what a resident wants or needs. And so, like, if we have to choose one of those tracks, I could see us potentially in a situation where we're not filling that spot. If we choose like critical care in that particular year, there's not a lot of PGY2 critical care interest.
Yeah, and that's really the goal, is to facilitate what's happening now and doing it in a standardized way. So it's very similar to in adult specialties right now. If you're a big site that has 4 or 5 or 6 PGY2 programs, you could actually set up your match so you have, 4 positions and you prioritize them. And if one position doesn't match, it rolls over to the other. So there will be an option for different national match numbers for the different ones, but you can recruit from your candidate pool and then recruit for 1 position or 2 position, and then flex it into either a PGY2 pediatrics or a PGY2 pediatrics with specialization in one of those specialties, doing it different from year to year.
Right. I mean, you can imagine, just as you described, one year maybe you don't have anybody who has that interest, so you don't fill that position that year, and you use that position in a different area. I mean, those are some of the things that we want to work out and provide guidance so everybody understands how to use this properly to their advantage and to the advantage of the trainees. But I think, one of the things that makes us maybe uber cautious is if you look back at what has happened in medicine and their over-specialization, I'll say, we want to be very considered as we look at areas for specialization. And so we're taking what Missy might tell me is an inordinately long time to get to this. But we want to make sure we do it right and we have a structure that then we can duplicate where it makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Janet, Jeff Brewer, Albany College of Pharmacy. I wanted to go back, new topic. So there was a discussion about, I think, antithrombosis and bringing in new specialty or programs under development. I wish I could remember the exact terminology.
That's all right.
How does that reflect back to colleagues like nephrology, for instance, that was shut down a handful of years ago? Would they be able to, if interested, and I'm speaking under my own guise here, not them, but I started thinking as I was sitting there, if there were old specialties that we have phased out of this system, would they be able to submit, or if they were interested? Has there been any discussion in that area?
What we're trying to set up, to get to your question, is a novel process that allows time for a new program type to demonstrate that there is a need in the marketplace, there's interest in the marketplace, and it's worth the effort to maintain that specialty. So the structure that we put together, I think, is a vast improvement over our history of how we handled new specialties. So it will provide us a lot of information before we make a final decision about, yes, we are no longer, we're taking off the training wheels and this program can continue. So I think there is an opportunity for, one of the things we don't want to do is stifle innovation. But I think what we want to make sure we don't end up looking like in 20 years is medicine. And so we want to just make sure that we put together and this is an iteration, of what we started a few years back, developing a novel process, and now we have revised it. And now we're putting these programs into a new structure to see, is this the right structure? So I think there will be opportunities for others who have an idea about a specialty maybe whose time has come, and we always have our own biases about, is it time for pharmacogenomics? Is it time for X, Y, or Z? But you really can't know until you do the work, put it out there, and then see if there are takers and how it grows and what the employers are looking for and all of that. So I think there is, to answer your question now, I think there is an opportunity for people, once we kind of have some experience with this, to submit a request and for us to look at whether we feel like that is a program we should put into the new novel process.
And it's really
Appreciate
important to
all
have
your
that,
work.
It's really important to have that critical mass. So for this application for thrombosis and hemostasis, there were over 100 letters of support for that, and there was demonstrated need in the marketplace. And there's a number of different questions and hoops to go through to look at the process and say, is there a potential trajectory where this is going to meet a public need that's not being met somewhere else, that is appropriately met by a PGY1 residency and not some other kind of training program. So it's really not putting the cart before the horse and making sure that ASHP and the profession invest resources in a way that's really prudent and effective for not only the profession of pharmacy, but also public health.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dion. I'm from Children's LA. I'm the coordinator for the PGY2 oncology program. Our accreditation, or our survey is this spring. So I'm wondering, if we are accredited, would we then have to get reaccredited once the new PEDS oncology standards are released? Or would we automatically be converted over?
Are you? I'm sorry, I didn't hear some of it. You're getting ready to be surveyed in your PGY2 oncology program?
Yes, at a children's hospital.
Okay, so you're talking about, so currently there is a PGY2 oncology program. As part of all of this process, if you have an accredited program, you are going to remain an accredited program. There will be an opportunity and a timetable for the programs that are in place to then transition. So once you're accredited, you are accredited for the length of accreditation, and it's not anything that you're going to have to be resurveyed for. But there'll be an opportunity through that timeline, and then when you're up for reaccreditation, to submit the new paperwork and to apply under the new framework at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Hope not to talk too much about CMS audits, but I've gone 8 years with really great CMS audits. I thought, oh, what is everyone talking about as far as these loss of funds? But then, go figure, this year I get hit by a whole bunch of line items not related to direct patient care. Time after time, hit and funds taken back. I'm worried about the slippery slope with that phrase, from this auditor. I think I may have emailed you about, especially about travel for residents being taken back by CMS. But I'm curious. We have great networking roundtables, at these conferences. I'll be really would be really supporting of a roundtable for CMS audits as well, just for us to compare notes, lessons learned. I thought I was being really OCD with my documentation, documenting preceptor hours and pharm academic and so forth. But to see some of our funds, that were due for, that are needed for the administration of the program, like recruitment costs, traveling to a student showcase for recruitment, things like that. CMS auditor will say, that's not related to direct patient care. So just something to please advocate for us. That travel to mid-year, for example, taken back, hotel costs, travel fees, all of that. So I'll be curious if we've just been really lucky over the years of being able to submit for all of that, or if this is something that other places have gotten hit with. And it's less than 10% of our residency budget, but still, if that were expanded across this entire room, that's a lot of funds.
One of the things, we haven't talked about doing roundtables, but what we have been talking with our government relations division about is crafting a survey of sorts that we would send out to all of our programs, because unless somebody talks to me about their issue, I don't necessarily know that it's happening, right? So we wanted to do another sort of survey to find out who's been having the problems and how prevalent this is, and is it regional, or is it a certain auditor that is causing this problem. So that is going to be coming out before too long. We're working on that with government relations now, and we'll be sending that out from our division, from ASO, to try to get a handle on sort of where we are right now with the CMS denials. But if it looks like it is really pervasive, our work is to go to CMS then and say, this is what we're seeing. You told us that this was going to get better, and it isn't, and to follow up on that. And it's not that easy to get CMS to sit down with you, but we did make it happen once, and I think we can try that again. But we have an awesome government relations division who is really in our corner about this. And that's why I say, if you all are having issues, please let me know. And then, of course, respond when we send out the survey, because the more information we have, the more leverage we have with CMS. So we're just trying to figure out how to get the best information out of a survey. What are the right questions to ask you guys that then Jillian can take back to CMS? So I would encourage you all to, feel free to communicate with us about your issues so that I can make sure the right people understand what's going on out in the field.
Thank you.
Hi, Brandy Zeller, St. Louis Children's. Not to beat a dead horse, I just had a different thought about the application deadline. So I know there's a lot of talk about having the last couple weeks off of December. As someone who works in the ICU, I definitely don't get that time off in December to have time to do that. But have we ever thought about pushing back the match date to like late March?
Yes, and I can't do it. And the reason is, I'm just being honest with you. The National Matching Service that hosts our match for us also does medicine matches, different other, not just one, but many. And so we have to stay within dates that they can support our match. So we have started as early as we can and gone about as late as we can with National Matching Service. We've looked at, when we first started doing this, this two-phase match, we tried to, one of the complaints that we got was about the time frame between phase 1 and phase 2, and that doesn't give people enough time to do evaluation or interviews and that. So we tried to spread that out a little bit. But there are some really hard limits to what I can do on either end. Like I cannot start any earlier because of the availability of the National Matching Service to support our match.
And Janet, the other issue with moving it later is licensure. And it's an issue for us every year getting our residents licensed in time. So being able to apply to the right state until we get a national license and something that's standardized, getting our incoming residency class set so they could start the licensure process. That's always been, as a program director, my biggest heartache is, get your stuff in, get it in early, and then holding your breath until all the residents get licensed so they can start the residency. So we can't move that phase 2 any later.
Right.
And make sure the residents will know in time to do the submissions they'll need to get licensed before July.
Right, and I do feel your pain, and I understand the question. And really, I think somebody asks me that question every year, but there is very little I can do about it, unfortunately.
Michael Ott, Erie County Medical Center, Buffalo, New York. With the new standards coming out, and that guy, what's the expectation that we send our resident candidates prior to interview? Is it what's laid out in the new standards and those policies and everything, which we don't have example documents for yet? Or is it what's in the current active standards and those policies? Because they're going to be residents under the new policies and everything. But we'd be sending them old policies. What's the expectation from ASHP?
Until July 1. Andrea, did you want to answer? Go ahead. Andrea is one of our staff members who has been intimately involved in the development of the new standard. So she's...
So until July 1st, we're under the old standards. So you would go by the old standard 1.6 or 1.7 on what you provide the residents.
And I think the other positive comment is everything's a lot clearer under the new standard, right? It's very specific about what you need and when to do it, and
right, but just want to
right.
make sure that we don't have to,
Right.
in the next 2 weeks, write a new manual.
Right.
And I just want to support Frank's comment about residents having to start prior to July 1. Programs should not be allowed to make their, I don't care if they're a PGY1 or a PGY2, come for orientation mid-June. There's programs that are doing that. It's disruptive if they're coming out of PGY1 going into PGY2. And you're taking, the last little bit of free time away from these kids if you're a PGY1 that's got them coming in for hospital orientation in mid-July, or mid-June, I mean.
Thank you.
Allison King, Children's Mercy in Kansas City, Missouri. I have a request for the commission. One of the things that came out of COVID was a lot of online recruiting and online open houses, and some of us at our institution are not able to host those or are able to advertise having them easily. It would be wonderful if there was a way that ASHP could find a forum to do that. So, and I think it would also be really helpful for candidates to go to one central location to then be able to find out what all the available open houses are.
Thank you.
Heather Johnson, University of Pittsburgh, my medical center. I was debated on whether or not to think about this deadline thing, and I finally decided, yes, I should say something. We moved our deadline early. We're not as early as the 19th, but we moved our deadline early because we were not able to evaluate the applications fast enough to get interview invites out, and we were losing candidates who had already gotten interviews because we couldn't turn around their applications fast enough. And so that was the major impetus for us to move our deadline to December 23rd. We're also forgiving on that, meaning that the candidate has to have their responsibility of stuff in on the 23rd. But if the letters of recommendation are lagging, we don't hold that against them. But I know students who've had that held against them because their letters of recommendation lagged. So in my mind, it would be ideal if our electronic application systems could support what's the candidate's responsibility and what's out of their control, because the transcripts are out of their control. The letters of recommendation are out of their control. And as a person who has written letters of recommendation and faxed them to places in the old days on the 31st of December, and written letters on Christmas Day and all those things to help our students and our residents out, I also think we do have to think about the well-being of those people who are writing letters and not putting them in a position to do that. The students do probably need opportunities to learn more about programs in real settings before the December deadline. So I applaud the idea of having a coordinated forum for more of these virtual things to happen. Our future residents are starting rotations in June. They used to start rotations in August or September. When they then came to mid-year, they then applied to programs, and they had to have those 4 or 5 months of rotations under their belt. Now they have many of those rotations under their belt and are making decisions and are knowing about the programs that they want to apply to earlier. I know that we can't move the match date. Maybe we need to move the big recruitment date.
Thank you.
Angela Sindrick from Geisinger Medical Center. To build on what was just said, I'm blessed to precept APPE students as well as PGY1s that are seeking residencies, and that actually starts in April of the year that they're kind of preceding all of this. So I see students in April, May, June, July, and then the PGY1s come, and I'm writing letters for everybody. But forecast doesn't open up for me until November. And the application is very standardized, and it's quite granular in the amount of competencies that I evaluate on my ICU rotation. And they ask me when they're with me in that month. If I could be able to log in and document everything up front, and I would have that letter ready to go for them, I could work on them longitudinally, that would definitely improve the quality of information that I could deliver because it's very fresh in my mind. I could pend that, and that way if they applied to a program that asked for something special, I could add it closer to the deadline. But it would definitely improve then my role as RPD later, because all of the people that I'm supporting through application, letters of rec are done, and then I can focus my efforts on reading the applications I'm receiving for my program later in the year.
So can I ask a clarifying question? so I make sure that I understand what you're asking. You want access to forecasts earlier than we currently do, is that?
Yes, so that I could be documenting when when a learner comes to me, they know they're residency bound, so many of them, and they say, I want you to be a letter writer for me. I could go in and write their letter then, when I'm writing their final eval.
Okay. Well, we're changing our forecast platform for next year, and it's becoming more flexible, but I'll have to have a conversation with that vendor in order to understand what they could or couldn't do along those lines. I don't know how to answer that without having a conversation, but thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Hi, Deanna McDaniel from University of Iowa. I just love these town halls because there's so many great numbers of RPDs and preceptors representing programs. So I don't have a question, but I actually was hoping you could entertain if we could just have a number of hands of the programs in here, PGY1s, that are actually choosing to do virtual only interviews. Would that be okay if we do that?
Of course.
I'm just curious just to see the landscape. Wow. And then same thing for PGY2s. How many are choosing to do virtual only? Okay, and then last is just how many are doing the hybrid, the in-person / okay. I was just curious because I think, one thing I was born out of the pandemic is so much of the virtual interviews. And, last year as ASHP is recommending or highly suggesting virtual. I think we're all learning that virtual may still be a benefit, and I think just goes to show it's a lot of still virtual recruitment. So thank you. I just wanted to see that.
No, you're welcome.
So Meg Moen with Regents Hospital in Minnesota. My question's actually very much related to that. This year we've opted to do hybrid interviews, specifically because a lot of the preceptors in our program really thought that we benefit from in-person interviews, and there was recommendations from ASHP to include virtual interviews, which I completely understand from an equity standpoint. I think that's a fantastic recommendation. I'm just wondering if there's any current guidance out there, or is there guidance being worked on in helping our programs in this virtual and hybrid landscape going forward from an interview standpoint, and how we can limit our bias that's introduced from in-person interviews versus virtual interviews, and doing those simultaneously?
That's a good question, and I have to say we have not done any work on that at this point. I think it's a good suggestion. We've been quite busy with the standard, and it has left little time for some other work like that, but I appreciate the suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody that has done work on that in their own program, because it's certainly something we've talked about as a preceptor group. Use ASHP Connect to share your thoughts, share your processes with others, and let's all learn from each other, because the first step to limiting or minimizing bias is just to be aware of the potential for it to exist, and be actively focused on things to limit it. So please share your ideas, thoughts, and best practices with all of us.
Luke Schultz, I'm the RPD of a couple programs at the University of Wisconsin Health. Throughout this meeting so far, I've talked to lots of people, and there's certainly a concern about the declining number of students enrolling in pharmacy schools. Pharmacy schools, in turn, have been lowering their standards for acceptance. That's a preface for, I'm curious to know, with the data you showed, with the number of residents who are not meeting standards and not completing residencies, it went from 199 to 277. It's a 40% increase in 1 year. If we're continuing to see, or potentially seeing, more graduating students that are barely meeting this, and your comment about those that aren't passing the exams, that could mean that a residency program could be facing every year a resident being eliminated from their program, especially large programs. Curious about your thoughts on that 40% increase. Do you have an expectation? Is that going to increase over the years? What should we be expecting as residency program directors with that increasing number of those residents who are not completing programs?
For those of you that have been involved with student training, both classroom and experiential, I think that we've been aware for the last couple of years of the fragility of our students and the challenges from virtual learning. So the students the last couple of years have come out of a year of APPEs where many of them were virtual and they didn't have in-person experiences. So it's really not unexpected, and I think it's hard to project those trends over time because this really is a disruption for all of us for practice as well as for experiential education. It's something we all need to watch closely, but I think, Luke, you're right. A lot of us have been doing various levels of remediation, and we're seeing the students that are getting back to in-person learning in the student environment having to shift back into that interaction mode too after those have started pharmacy school without those in-person interactions. So I think it's going to be a transition for all of us, but hopefully it won't be a growing trend.
And to your question or your statement about the declining enrollment in schools of pharmacy, ASHP is a member organization that participates with other pharmacy member organizations and a group called JCPP, Joint Commission of Pharmacy Practitioners. And the last meeting that we had, there was a discussion about the workforce, and it included lots of information about what the schools of pharmacy are seeing. And I presented about what's happening with residency applications, et cetera. So we had a very speculative, actually, discussion about that because nobody really understands whether this is an anomaly as a result of this virtual education and that it will right itself once the students are fully in person and our experiential training is in person, et cetera. It's really hard to understand what happened and what will persist. So I think we've all agreed, not just ASHP, but the other organizations, that this is something we need to watch and understand better and continue to collect data on so that maybe at some point we could make some projections or have some understanding of what it is that we're currently experiencing. But it is a bit of a dilemma when you can't really make a specific judgment about it because there's just not enough understanding of the data that we're seeing. But it's a very good point, and we're very well aware of it and very interested in continuing to see what's happening.
Sounds good. Thanks for keeping it top of mind. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I am Josh Corder. I'm a pharmacist at Cincinnati Children's, just a preceptor. Just surely a logistical question for the session tomorrow on the guideline updates as to whether or not there will be a recording available.
There will be a what?
Recording.
I think we did ask for that to be recorded. Right, Andrea? Yeah, okay, yes.
Thank you much.
Yes, and we'll make that available to people as well. For those of you who might have a conflict, unable to attend or whatever.
Great. I'm not seeing anybody else go up to the mic. Are folks finally talked out? I think it's great. We've had some years that there was nothing to discuss. I think it's great to have the participation, and I really echo the comments that it's wonderful to get us all back together and being able to share with each other and continue to move residency programs and residency education further. Thank you, everybody.
And I do have one other thing to share with you all, and this is personal. I am going to be retiring in March of next year. So it will be after the March CSC meeting, and my position is posted and available for interest. So I just wanted to say it has been my pleasure and privilege to work with all of you over the last 9 years. So thank you very much. Thank you all very much.